Hello again and welcome. Thank you for tuning in. We were outside in our usual place, but it was too windy today and we didn't want to take another day to record, so we came inside. And unfortunately, my dog has to be part of the show. So hopefully, she won't be too distracting. The Bible says in Romans 10:14-15 in the New Living Translation, "But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, 'How beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news.'" I would like to introduce you to Lois Thiessen, who has lived that life of service with her husband Dwayne. Lois, tell us how it all began.
Well, Lori, that's an interesting question. And it goes back to a very young age. My mom recalls a story that she's told me on more than one occasion, that when I was too young to remember, there was a missionary song that was often sung in our church at missionary conventions or even during the year. And the main words were, "Ready to go, ready to stay, ready to do thy will." And she said every time they would sing that at church, I would start to cry. And at first it bothered her, and she would wish I would stay sleeping if I'd fallen asleep during the message. And then she began to think that maybe God was speaking to my heart, and that she should listen and find out what her role was in that. And I'm so glad that my mom took that listener and observer stance, because she began to feed that little interest that I had in or demonstrated in missions. And so when I was about 8 or 9, we had our annual missionary conference with missionary speakers, and I remember listening specifically to one missionary and being impacted by the stories. And when he got to the end of his message and made the invitation, if there was people who would be willing to stand and say that they would be willing to go if that's what God asked them to do, I stood with others that stood. And I knew that that was something that God had put into me. But my parents made a wide choice. They fed that interest. And so we had missionaries in our home. They bought me missionary biographies. And I read stories of missionaries that lived adventures in Africa, in Japan, in Indonesia. And I walked right alongside them in those stories and felt like I was a part of it. And I know that that helped to inspire me to continue on in that direction. There were opportunities when I got older for international travel, and that was something also that my parents accepted and supported. And I really appreciated that they did that. And that gave me an opportunity to travel with my dad for 6 weeks one summer, visiting about 16 countries.
Wow.
Which is a stupid way to go, but we didn't know any better, and we saw and learned a lot of interesting things as we visited missionaries where they worked, and that impacted my life. Another opportunity was in seminary, when there came a program for a missionary internship in the Philippines, and I applied immediately for that and began to understand what it would be like for a prolonged period of time in another culture, and I loved it. I couldn't wait to get back.
Wow.
But at the same time, there was, at every point after my university, after my seminary training, when attractive and alternate pathways presented themselves as career choices, and I looked at them and investigated them and was interested by them. But God always brought me back to this original passion and commitment that I had to missions and to a life overseas. And I'm very grateful that he did that in many different ways and creative ways. So what I found out, because what I kind of thought was that when I made an expression that I was willing to go, that meant to get to the point of service. What hadn't crossed my mind, that as God brought Dwayne's and my life together and took us to Peru, which was our first field of service, that disposition that was necessary to get me to Peru needed to stay alive and keep going, as we had to make decisions about which city to work in, what type of ministry to get involved in, when to make changes and when not to. And there was still that need for a willingness to go, that effort to listen to God's voice and to follow what he was saying. That kind of came to a peak when the Christian and Missionary Alliance chose to take their missionaries out of Peru and redeploy them to other places, because they felt that they had accomplished the goals that they went to Peru to achieve. And the Peruvian nationals were able to continue what had been done completely and satisfactorily on their own.
Wow.
They had pastors, they had professors for the Bible Institute. They were sending missionaries to other countries. And so the choice had to be made, would we still be willing to go someplace else? And God took us to Uruguay, and it was a wonderful adventure of another 10 years that were added to our overseas commitment. Retirement came a little earlier than we had planned for it to come because of taking care of Dwayne's mother. But at the same time, I found there was that need for a disposition to be willing to go back home and to respond to what God was asking us to do there. And I think that's part of what makes life an adventure, when you follow God's leading, because there's always decisions to be made. There's a walk and a trust in him. But you are excited and amazed at the places it takes you.
Yeah. Well, do you have any more memorable moments you would like to share with us? I'm sure you have them.
Oh, probably way more than what we can fit in here today. But I will mention a few.
Yes.
When we got to Peru, there was a booming evangelism program going on in Lima, and there was explosive growth in the churches and churches being added in the city of Lima. It was a wonderful place to start our missionary career, because we were learning. We were learning how to adjust culturally, and we were learning how to communicate the gospel in another culture. And I will never forget the day that someone came into church and sat down beside me. It was before the service began and the choir was practicing. And they sat looking forward like this and said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "How do you get all these people to come to your church?" And I didn't find out until later that he was visiting from a sect down the street and wanted to know why all this growth. And he said, "Do you sort of send like a pastor or a missionary out with someone from the church to get people to come?" Oh my goodness, I said, "No, that would be impossible, because there aren't nearly enough pastors and missionaries to do that, to get this kind of response."
Yeah.
Every member lived a life of light and love in their workplace, in their community, and in their family. And they were the ones that were bringing people to the churches. The pastors were kept full time just feeding the people that came. And it was such an exciting environment to be in. Then we went to Cusco. And that was a totally different experience, because it was church planting. And that meant there weren't people there to bring in other people. We had to bring the other people in. And I'll give you just a couple examples of things that happened there. One of the things that God began to teach us was that where he had put us, with the abilities and the family that he had given to us, that was what was going to be our bridges into the community. And all we had to do was be open to how he wanted to use all of that together. And we found that our children were bridges into the community. Allison had a little friend when they were about 3 years old, our neighbor's daughter. And of course, because they would get together and they would plead for playtime together, Jenny and I got to know each other as well. And a friendship blossomed between our families, but it was because of our children that it started. And I remember the day that she gave her life to Christ. And it was in a setting not unlike the one we're in right now. But as we quietly sat and talked to one another about what it meant to give your life to Jesus, our kids were running around and laughing and singing and just having a fine time. But that didn't matter to God. That was the atmosphere in which Jenny's heart responded to God. And she began a life of following God and doing what he was asking her to do. That had a chain effect because at that time we were trying to follow the injunction of Paul as a church ministry team, that we would try every means to reach some. And one of the ideas that someone came up with was to have a luncheon for medical doctors. They would likely never enter the door of our churches, but they might be open to something that was for them professionally. The reason that we did that was that the evangelist that was coming to speak at that particular conference was a medical doctor. His first training was in psychiatry, and then he went into the pastorate. However, I am very limited in decorating my home. And it was Jenny who sewed curtains and hung them an hour before those doctors got there so that it would look like a warm home environment. And she helped me to create an environment that I never could have on my own. And I realized that God had placed us in a community with resources that I didn't have, and that we could work together to make something happen. And it was either 11 or 12 doctors that came to our home that day and enjoyed a meal and listened intently as the visiting pastor and medical doctor shared how he blended his profession with his faith in Jesus Christ. And it had a powerful impact. There's other examples of how God has used our children, but check me out sometime and I'll tell you more. We moved on from that experience of seeing a small group grow into a thriving church, had opportunities to do leadership training and build into their lives, and that took us to our next post in Arequipa, where we began teaching in the Bible Institute and an extension one in another city as well. And now it was time in our career not just to be out doing the evangelism, but preparing the leaders who would be involved in making that happen as well. And it's so exciting at this stage of our career to see how some of those students are in ministry now and doing what we did together and what they were prepared to do. You want me to say a couple from Uruguay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I could go on and on, so you just stop me. When we went to Uruguay, it was the training in the Bible Institute that was sort of the preparation that got us the invitation to go there. And so that was our main focus. And we taught in the Bible Institute in Rivera, where we lived, as well as in 2 cities. We had extension classes out there. And once again, we saw how God used the home that he placed us in and the friends that we made to do what he had for us to do there. One example, we had an experience that we've never had anywhere else, but one of the homes that we lived in the first half of our time in Uruguay, had a swimming pool and a gorgeous backyard with plants that flowered in every season and lovely grass that was quite extensive. And it became a place that we could do events. And we loved having the students over and year-end dinners, candlelight dinners around the pool. We had so much fun making things happen there. But what we found too was that the pool provided a relaxed atmosphere where people were willing to open up and let some of their barriers down and just begin to relate as friends. And so many of our pastors and wives were able to enjoy that home and even spend some downtime there. And also the neighborhood girls enjoyed it a lot, especially the pool. Excuse me. But that gave opportunity to reach into our neighborhood and get to know our neighbors as they permitted us to interact with their children. But there was one other ministry that was sort of informal, that was very close to my heart. And I'll get to it in a moment to say how Canby Alliance Church was directly connected to that ministry. Our pastors were working hard and long, and they were wearing out. And we saw the signs of something that I'd experienced when we lived in Canby our first time, of depression, of being very close to burnout. And it was such a privilege to be able to open our home and let it be a place for renewal. And one pastor lived with us for 3 weeks, and he had the bedroom that was close to the pool entrance, and he could just go in the garden and spend his hours there talking to God, enjoying nature, and just renewing his spirit and his body. That's one example of others that we had like that. And another thing that happened when we lived there was the beginning of the pastors' wives pulling together. And we began to have weekend retreats. And in that home, mattresses were laid out on the floor, tables were joined together to have an eating area, and the pastors' wives from across Uruguay, we were a small group at that time, pastors' wives and missionaries, we were about 15 at that time. And we got together and we cried and prayed together, and we laughed and played together. And it began to form a unity in them, where they saw each other as resources and encouragers and friends and co-laborers, even though they were separated by geographical distance. And that was one of the most exciting things to me, to be involved in Uruguay.
You had a sisterhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Well, so how did your family get connected to our church?
It was interesting, and I think it shows the character of Canby Alliance Church. We had a need, and they responded. Our girls wanted to go to Life Conference, and we didn't realize when we wanted to register them for Life, which would happen within a few weeks after our arriving home for home assignment, we didn't realize that they had to go with a group. They couldn't just register and go as individuals. Well, when we found that out, we wrote our district and asked if there would be any church who would be willing to take on our girls as a part of their group and take them to Life as well as their youth group. And Canby offered. And so that began a relationship with Canby, and Dwayne and I talked about it and said, well, if our girls get to know the young people from the Canby Alliance Church at the beginning of a home assignment year, it makes sense to just live there so that those friendships can continue on throughout the year. It was a really good decision. And I can't begin to express how wonderful it was, the way we were embraced by the church and assisted by the church in the transition that was a very significant one for our family. Lori, you and your family opened your home for a couple weeks so that we could do house hunting in Canby, and you made us feel a part of you, and that hasn't stopped. We appreciate that.
No, it hasn't.
And as the year rolled on, we were dealing with health crisis of Dwayne's father, and sometimes we had to go to Springfield during the week. And the Kreiders opened their home to Anita, and they became a second family to Anita, so that whenever we had to go to Springfield, she just moved in with them. And she still considers Jenny her second mom. So there's just a really significant beginning to our time of being in the Canby Alliance Church. we thought we were making the decision in the best interest of our children. God knew that that decision was made because of what I was going to need that year. And in the fall, coming off of a very, very busy time on the field, moving into health issues with Dwayne's father, I started going downhill emotionally and went into a depression. I hadn't seen it coming, and I got kind of sidelined by it. And once again, I can't believe the beauty of the family of the Canby Alliance Church and the way they surrounded us with love and friendship, no expectations, just giving to us in so many ways. And I didn't find out till later that one of the reasons you did that is because you'd been through it. And you understood what it was like for leadership to struggle emotionally and have to deal with issues to get back on your feet, to be able to get to a point of ministry again. Anita reminded me just this last week that one of the reasons that we could do what we did in helping in renewal and restoration for some of our pastors and their wives in Uruguay was a direct result of what we lived and experienced in Canby.
Wow.
And she said to me, Mom, you did for them what Canby Alliance did for you. And if you hadn't gone through that, you might not have been sensitive to that need. And it's good to be reminded of our weaknesses and how God will make them become our strengths.
Yes.
So that was in 2001 that we moved here. And we went back to Peru in 2003, and that same year went on to Uruguay. And those friendships that were forged in that period of time have bridged the gap to 2019, when again another health crisis brought us to Canby. Canby had always been at the top of our list for places that we would like to retire. It was at the top of the list for our children desires for us as well. They wanted us to be here. And in 2019, that became a reality as circumstances changed in our lives. And we came into that same supportive, encouraging environment of love and friendship that we had had almost 20 years earlier. And it has served to put us on our feet once again. And we are so grateful for the way this church gets involved, not just financially in missions, but in committing themselves to the people that are international workers. And we've seen it as we've seen international workers visit the church in the last 2 years that we've been here. And I love that heart that you have for the people who are going and for the people that are there that they're ministering to, as we've seen with the partnership in Sierra Leone. You don't just talk missions, you live missions. And that has had a deep impact on our life.
Okay.
Thought you might get off easy, Lois. Yeah. It's all, you're a part of it. And it's been a gift to us. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah. Well, that God works in mysterious and wonderful ways. And yeah, we've become like family, extended family through all of this. So
let me just add one more thing, because I think it's really another critical issue. When we were here in 2001 to 2003, Anita felt all of the tension of what was going on at home. And we can never thank Canby Alliance enough for the youth group that they had, the youth leaders that they had, because they gave her a listening ear, someone who would pray with her and would walk her through her anger at God for what was happening, and helped her to stand firm in her faith even when things got difficult. And yeah, we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, because those are formative years for her. She was in high school still.
She was in her first year of high school here.
Yeah, and what about Allison was away at
Allison was in
college?
her first year of university.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah.
But all three of them, even Matt, have said that when they came to Canby, anytime they came to Canby to visit us when we were here,
Mm.
they felt like they were coming home to one
Oh,
of their homes.
wow.
So,
Yeah. And I think that's important when you've lived away. Yeah, I mean, not away, but you've lived in different places.
yeah.
I've heard that. Where is home, you know? Wow, that's special. Our hearts got knit together. Canby
Mm.
Alliance and Canby and the Thiessens. So, well, share some parting words with us.
Yeah, there's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I appreciate this opportunity to be able to share with you because it's given me a chance to go down memory lane and relive some of the things we've lived, remember some of the things we've been told, remember some of the decisions that we've made. A speaker that we heard when we were, I'm pretty sure it was on our first home assignment in Canada, he was an international evangelist. And when he talked about how you do the work of missions, he said, I want to say it's really simple. He said it boils down to two things, and he pulled them straight out of Scripture and the Great Commandment. Love God and love people. He said if you do those two things, you will be successful in reaching people for Jesus Christ. And I held on to those words as we returned to continuing our missionary career. And I think they became the theme for my life. I wanted to love God with all my heart. I wanted to love people to Jesus. And there were so many opportunities that God opened up that we could do that and just share his love with the people that were around us. And I would challenge you in these times where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of frustration, a lot of fear due to COVID, due to the racial tensions that we're facing, due to the election process that we're going through for coming up towards November. And we have a message of hope. We have a message of a stable, solid foundation. We have a message of love that gives, not that expects or takes. And all we need to do is just listen to what God is saying about how he can use the home where we are, how he can use the children he's given us, how we can use the reduced opportunities that we have in this time where we have to be more careful about interacting with others. And he will show us the way. There was a song that we sang a couple weeks ago in church, and I love the words. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. And I think of how many times over the years we have stood amazed at seeing God at work and knowing that it went far beyond anything that we could ever accomplish. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are. That's all about loving God. Then it goes on, and fill me with your love and lead me in your love to those around me. That's all about loving people. And to me, it makes evangelism a whole lot more simple than a 12-week course.
Yeah.
Although there are 12-week courses that I've taken that have really helped me. But I like the simplified approach.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's hard to come to the end of this because there's so many more interesting things that Lois could tell us and tell you. So like she said, contact her. Their number is in an address. An email is in the church directory now. And reach out. And thank you again for taking time to watch this and spend this time with Lois and I, as well as Carolyn and Marie. All right. Have a good evening.